Oh, thank you, Gareth. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. It's really lovely to be with familiar and unfamiliar faces. And yeah, so Ed Whitelaw invited me to do this, so blame Ed, although don't blame Ed because he's off sick with COVID, be nice to Ed. But yeah, basically, we recently joined PSEN, so this is our first AGM. Yeah, really honoured to be a part of the PSEN network. And yeah, so my name is Jack. I'm the director of Borrowed Parts Brew Co. That is the brewery. We are a brewery. We are a community benefit society, which is a type of cooperative. We're based in City College, Plymouth. So
there's a history there, Roger, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is it?
Sorry, no, Roger Pike from Millfields.
Yeah.
He used to do the same thing. Yeah.
With the same equipment, I think.
Sorry, same equipment, yeah.
So you've inherited it from Millfields. Sorry, I've interrupted, but it's
No,
an
that-
interesting history.
It is really interesting for me to hear bits of snatches of history about the site, because actually, like, it's a bit of a black box to me. Like, I really don't know what was happening in the brewery for most of its existence. So it was installed in the year 2000. A local brewer and like a CAMRA, like regional director, applied for European Union regional development funding. And that funding allowed him to then set up this teaching brewery at City College. So it wasn't exactly like a City College Plymouth initiative, it was more like a brewer approached them, got some EU funding. That was when they were just throwing money around to do things like this. And ran it for a few years as both a commercial and a teaching brewery, making traditional like cask ale or real ale. So, you know, not the modern fancy stuff, not carbonated, you know, none of that. Next slide, please. Cool. That's some of the beer that we've been making. So the beer that we're making is not, well, we do have a traditional real ale that we've been making, but like mainly what we're doing is like making craft beer. So that's what we have downstairs that you're all welcome to try a sample of if you partake in such things. No pressure if you don't, but it is free. Catch it while it lasts. So that's our kind of like our main beer. It's a 4.2 ABV like carbonated pale ale. I don't really have notes for these slides. So like, some of the slides that are coming later are much more like organised. So this is more of me doing a sort of a stream of consciousness sort of overview. So just, yeah, I hope that's fine. But yeah, so how did the brewery come about? It came about just before the pandemic. Some discussions were floating around about the brewery between the college, between Real Ideas organisation, between people who are sort of living in the community doing stuff with social enterprise and cooperative development, sort of community development work. And yeah, there's no sort of like simple, straightforward story as to sort of how it came about, but there was sort of some, you know, top level stakeholders kind of met. There was an opportunity to get some grant funding through Power to Change. Power to Change were willing to fund it as a community business. And basically the deal that we struck with the college is that we can operate and use their teaching brewery in exchange for doing educational collaboration with the college. And I should say, because going back to what I said at the start, so it was installed in the year 2000 and it was ran for a number of years as a commercial and teaching brewery. And then the guy who founded it like tragically died. And so because it wasn't really a fully integrated City College project and piece of kit, there wasn't, from what I understand, there wasn't really like the staff or the desire or necessarily the funding to sort of continue it. But like I say, I don't really know what happened. It's a black box, right? And I think most of the people who were there no longer even work at the college. But the people who work at the college now were very, very happy when we came along in like 2019 and asked them, you know, could we use this kit, which has been lying idle for years and years and years, right? No one was doing anything with it. And so those conversations were happening. That got plugged into some grant fund finance through Power to Change. Then the pandemic happened. And that kind of, you know, that was a curse and a blessing in a way. It was a curse because obviously, and it also like delayed things massively. You know, that ran us up against supply chain issues, just a never-ending, like we experienced all of that stuff firsthand. So like you couldn't get hold of parts, you couldn't get hold of services. It was an absolute nightmare.
Licensing as well, wasn't it?
What was that?
Some complex licensing stuff, isn't
Beer is like highly, highly licensed. There are also there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of regulation involved in brewing beer, running a brewery, paying tax. There's a lot of work. So it took a long time to get really properly set up. It took a long time to kind of get training in place for myself and then a core group of people. So in the previous picture, you saw Kayla and Cleo. Kayla and Cleo are from hospitality backgrounds, so they're both trained, front of house, back of house, kitchen, and bakers as well. So they've kind of got very transferable skill sets, and they live in the area. So we're working with people like Kayla and Cleo who are from hospitality backgrounds. Along with myself, we've been getting training in how to brew beer. Next slide, please. So that's our brand, our logo, some design. That was done by the fabulous Chris Mayo of Mutant Creative. I think we've got some friends of Chris in the audience. Those were printed by Alan Quadreau. Alan Quadreau is friend of PSEN, runs his own social enterprise, I believe.
Yeah, Stonehouse Voice.
Stonehouse Voice, community newspaper in Stonehouse. I imagine all of you know this, but the brewery is located in, I think it is technically Stonehouse. It's just on the border of Stonehouse in the college. Next slide, please. Here is some images of cans which don't exist yet, but will exist in about a month's time. And they will look at least as good as that, and hopefully will taste even better. But again, we've got design work from Chris Mayo, and then also a local illustrator called Laura Hall, who's fantastic. That's something that so we're called Borrowed Parts, and where does that name come from? Borrowed Parts kind of comes from the fact that most good names have been taken, so it was a desperate scrabble to find a name. But I think I'm really happy with Borrowed Parts because it kind of describes what we're doing. We are a cooperative, it's many hands involved, and then many different parts, including a brewery, which fundamentally we do not own, we are leasing from the college. And then back to the college, and back to what we're doing with the college, and back to the stipulation of working with the college. So the college, very happy for us to be there, bringing it back into life, breathing some life into it. But the stipulation in the lease that we have with the college is that we have to work together to do educational partnerships, educational outcomes. And we're kind of figuring that out in real time as we go, but we're working with I guess there's two strands to it, right? So we're working with faculty members. So we're doing stuff working with heads of department, technicians around getting students in who are maybe learning things about, for example, fermentation in biology class, and then bringing them into the brewery and saying, well, here's a practical application of that knowledge, for example. Sort of curricular type stuff. And then the other strand of it is work experience, which the college is very, very hot on, getting students work experience, work placements. So we're doing a little bit of that. We're not in there all the time, and it's quite intense work when you are brewing. But we've had a couple of really successful goes where we've had students come in and we've paid them, day rates to brew with us, setting the same rates that we would set ourselves for doing work at the moment, which they were very happy about because they normally do not get paid for work experience. Next slide, please. There's some photogenic, happy people enjoying our beer at our launch event. Next slide, please. That was at Minerva Cafe. Thank you, Minerva, for that. Yeah, so I actually added this in while Lucy was talking. Lucy gave it was Lucy, wasn't it? Yeah. Lucy gave a really fascinating talk. So we are, now we are primarily financed through the Co-op Loan Fund from a cooperative and community investment firm. They were set up in the 70s by, there are different funds that this cooperative oversees. One of the funds, and I think the fund that we're getting, I think was set up by Tony Benn in Bristol in the 70s. So, they've got millions and millions of pounds in investment money to throw at stuff like this. And so they're a fabulous partner, because basically we'd had some initial grant funding, and that initial grant funding was very useful for certain things. What it was not useful for was surviving a pandemic, and then, which is no one's fault, it was what it was. It was not useful for getting through a pandemic, and it was funding dried up, and it was quite hard to get funding to do the cash flow production to, once we'd done the research and development side and figured out what we're doing, how we're doing it, to actually then get money to buy the ingredients, get the services. So for example, we can't do packaging in-house. So if we want to make carbonated beer, we have to send it off to get packaged, because the brewery was not built with that in mind. It just doesn't have the equipment, it just doesn't have the space. So we're reliant on sending beer away to get packaged and then returned to us in keg form. So that will cost money up front. So we were able to get that through this fund, which has been fantastic. There's Cleo, there's me, looking very green. Next slide, please. Okay, thriving in the new. So I asked Gareth, I said, Gareth, what should I talk about? And Gareth very kindly gave me a couple of questions as prompts. So thriving in the new, why have we chosen the model that we have? I don't think I need to convince any of you, and I think Lucy's already said all of this much better than I'm going to say it, but just to kind of remind you, I think there are pragmatic arguments for doing a social enterprise or cooperative model, and there are ethical arguments. I think the pragmatic arguments are, if you give people a meaningful stake, this increases your likelihood of success in the market. People who feel that they have a meaningful stake are more likely to have your back than people that you have a purely transactional relationship with. Co-ops statistically are far less likely to fold. So there's some interesting stats done by Co-ops UK and others. So Gareth I'm sure knows about this, but there are individual cases, like there are places in Spain that are very worker co-op dense, and they did fabulously during well, not fabulously, but they came out of the pandemic very, very well, for example. And then in the UK, and I think just generally co-ops are just statistically far less likely to go under in the first 3 years, and in the first 3 years most small businesses are statistically, I think is it 2/3 of SMEs in the first 3 years don't survive. Cooperativism promotes long-termism over short-term investor profit maximization and labour disciplining. So, again, if you have a group of you and you have a somewhat horizontal relationship to each other rather than a vertical relationship, it helps overcome, falling into the traps of disciplining of labour, which we have all experienced in work, I'm sure, in various ways. And it promotes long-term thinking over short-term investor profit. Now, we are a type of social enterprise, I guess. I think we are a community benefit society. And we have all of this stuff which is much more long-term. But we are also a business, and that business model means, you do have to think in quarterly terms. You do have to think of oh shit, how do I get through January, February, March? And that's horrible. And it does.
You've got to sell some beer.
You've got to sell a lot of beer. You've got to sell the right amount of beer at the right time. But I think having this cooperative model and this social enterprise integration, it does temper a lot of that. It does. And working collaboratively and cooperatively with the college, we're not paying full rates for being there, right? So, we're not paying the same commercial rent at the moment that we would be paying if we just built this from scratch. So that helps us to not be so, cutthroat in decisions that we're making, for example, right? Ethical arguments. It is better to empower people than disempower them. It is better to work collaboratively than impositionally. It is better for communities when you organise for the long term instead of short-term profit extraction. For example, look at the Barcode in Plymouth, built by British Land in collaboration with Drake Circus. I think some sort of development needed to happen on that site, but I think sticking something called the Barcode there. An interesting, so I'm going off on a tangent here, but does anyone know why it's called the Barcode?
Because everyone in the comment section called it that in Plymouth Herald.
That's true. That's a big part of it. There is another part of it, which is that I think the planning people in the council told them, when you build this, you have to make it representative of being in Britain's ocean city. It's got to have some maritime shit going on with it somewhere, right? So in the mock-ups, they had a sort of a silver and gold undulating wave cladding, right? That cladding became a barcode. That barcode then became the barcode when people saw it. But literally, it is a symbol of profit extraction. It is a symbol of transaction, as an end in itself. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a B Corp that is terrible. Former Brewdog staff accuse craft beer firm of culture of fear. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of stuff that Brewdog have been under investigation for. There's been BBC documentaries, there's been Guardian investigations, there's been worker organising within Brewdog, whistleblowing. It's a mess. So that's a very good example of, greenwashing in part, but also, social enterprise washing. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting example I just sort of threw in here just as food for thought. So this is the other end of the scale. So this is an article that you can read, the Ivy House Union. So the Ivy House, I'll just read this for you. On the 30th of September 2018, staff at the Ivy House Community Pub, a cooperatively owned pub in Nunhead, southeast London, the first co-op pub in London, took spontaneous emergency strike action. The Wildcat strike was a response to the effective dismissal of 4 members of the pub by the management. So basically they had just a very dysfunctional relationship with this management who was very removed, very aloof from the on-the-ground workers. And then in turn they all had a very kind of aloof and dysfunctional relationship with the board of directors who were not the workers. And it was all a bit of a mess, and it led to this Wildcat strike, but then it also led to effective unionisation. Now I think it's a success story now. It's, they unionised, they negotiated, they got around the table, they figured something out, and I think now it's a very successful, thriving co-op pub. But I don't know, I'm not really here to tell you what lessons to take away from that, only that you can call yourself a cooperative, you can call yourself a B Corp, but are you walking the walk as well as talking the talk? Just something to bear in mind. And I think there's a lot there in terms of how you structure governance and how you structure stakeholder engagement and stakeholder management. There's probably lots of lessons there. Next slide, please. Don't worry, we're nearly done. We are nearly done. I'm running 2 minutes over. What is the wider need for a more purposeful economy? Again, Lucy covered a lot of this, but ecological and climatic tipping points, future pandemics, cost of living crisis, vertical wealth transfer out of the productive economy and into shareholders, fragility of just-in-time supply chain. You know all of this, right? Next slide, please. What are we doing about it? I would say, nothing that is truly up to the challenge, nothing that is truly sufficient, us personally. But currently, some things that we're doing about it is, we're trying to be a part of the circular social economy in Plymouth. We have a relationship with Snapdragon CIC where we take hop waste to Snapdragons and it goes to their, community allotment. Working with Zedify, who are not yet a member of PSEN, I think they should become one, but they are also a real living wage employer, which is very nice. So Zedify are a low carbon, e-cargo bike outfit doing deliveries. Yeah, they're really cool. Working with Bikespace, actually, so they're collaborating with Bikespace. They're the Plymouth franchise of the national Zedify working with Bikespace. They've got a lot of plans about setting up, supply chains and depots in Plymouth to handle Plymouth delivery, and very interesting guys. Selling products and services to socially conscious venues and operators, like today, working with Gareth from PSEN, that was lovely. Paying students real living wages. The real living wage is probably, how it's defined, is probably already out of date. We should probably be looking at a £15 minimum wage, but obviously not everyone is going to be able to bring that in, overnight, but over the next 2-3 years, looking at £15 minimum wage. But I guess trying to hold ourselves to that standard of at least a real minimum wage. And developing educational resources across departments at the college, so we've got that educational relationship with the college. Procuring locally and socially, so we've worked with, Albion Workshop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to procure locally where we can. Although, doing a brewery, you are totally dependent on, global and national supply chains as well. Gas, cleaning fluids, the hops are grown in America. Unless you are using purely English hops and just making purely English car scale, which we did consider. The problem is there isn't really a business model to do that in Plymouth. It doesn't really exist. There's already car scale brewers, they're already doing that. We don't need another one. But in the future, going forward, there's some big stuff that we would love to be able to do. we'd love to be able to implement a 4-day work week. So breweries are already doing this. So Pressure Drop in London, who are part of the Bermondsey Beer Mile, they're like a really esteemed craft beer outfit. You can buy them in Vessel up on Exeter Street. They can move to a 4-day work week. We would like to do that eventually, once we even have a normal work week. It's chaos at the moment. This is like whatever I can get on my own. Install a low carbon brew plant in a community and a cooperatively owned venue. So the brewery at City College Plymouth, we are eternally grateful for it, and we couldn't be doing any of this without it. It is not efficient, it is not sustainable. If you build one from scratch, that would be the upfront carbon footprint of building stuff and fabricating stuff from scratch. But over the long term, you can do a lot around energy capture, heat capture, water capture, solar power, battery installation. There's a lot you can do. Brewing, by Ian, brewing doesn't have to be super wasteful. And yeah, we would like a cooperative and community-owned venue. That would be great. We can but dream. We will see. And yeah, trying to be ahead of the curve on wage floors and wage rises. Oh yeah, and I just added this quote here saying, what can we do about it? Nothing that is truly sufficient, but we can try. And I'm just reminded of this quote from Richard Seymour, where he basically says, if we really took climate change and ecological collapse seriously, every town hall, every village pub in the land would be having weekly emergency meetings. We are not doing that. But there is a climate hub in Plymouth now, so that's something. So yeah, thank you for having me. There was free beer downstairs. Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great addition to the CoOps and community social economy. Yeah, I don't drink beer, but I might come and try yours. So
we're going to do an alcohol-free beer or something.
I'll try that. I did gin though. There are some social enterprise gins. If you're going to brunch out, I'll put the hand up for the gin.
The still,
Or ginger beer. Great. Okay. Well, that's it for the talky bits. Let's go and get some beer. We can go to the dome. Please hang around for another half an hour, have a chat, and yeah, let's go and get some beer.